Hi, everybody. It's Mrs. Smith. I am here to read you the Sources of Law document. So we have some images on here and some sources of laws and examples. And we're using the U.S. Postal Service as an example. So the Constitution. The Constitution gives Congress the power to establish post offices and post roads, make all laws that are necessary and proper for executing this task. Okay, so they can make post offices, roads, and laws related to creating those things. The United States Code gives Congress, is where Congress passes laws to establish the Postal Service, direct the Postal Service to provide efficient service at fair rates, and authorize the Postal Service to adopt rules and regulations. So notice this is offices and roads up here that the Constitution gives the Congress power to establish. The United States Code is talking about the Postal Service. All right. The Code of Federal Regulations. The Postal Service adopts regulations to establish rules for daily operations at post offices around the country, limit what people are allowed to do on post office property, and to create special postal programs. So you can see how this is kind of getting more and more specific. So this is dealing with the rules for the operations of the daily service. Okay. Court cases, judicial precedent. Did I say that right? Precedent. It almost sounded like I said president. I said precedent. The judicial system hears cases about violations of the Constitution, the Code, and the regulations. The Code and the regulations cannot violate the U.S. Constitution. The court's interpretation of the Constitution, the Code, and the regulations is like an extra law. Okay, got all that? So this KWL chart, sources of law, what do you know? What do you wonder? What have you learned? We're going to skim right over that. That's not even in your Google form. And I'm hoping that you've already looked at that Google form and seen what questions you should be listening for right now. Okay, sources of law. Where do our laws come from? Laws keep our society running as smoothly as possible. When you think of the law, you probably think of rules that say what people can and can't do. We all know that you can't steal from others without getting into trouble. That's one example of a law, but most laws set rules for how things work. There are laws about how people buy and sell property, how we elect government officials, and how activities in daily life should work. Where do all these laws come from? There are three main sources of law in the United States: constitutions, statutes, and regulations. So, constitutions. The U.S. Constitution, the United States Constitution, sorry, I abbreviated. The United States Constitution is often called the supreme law of the land. That means no law in the country can violate the rules, laws, and rights set forth in the Constitution. Some parts of the Constitution give specific laws that apply everywhere in the United States. For example, if someone commits a crime in one state and then flees to another state, the Constitution allows the criminal to be extradited or sent back to the state where the crime was committed. Other parts of the Constitution either authorize, allow types of laws that may be passed, or forbid, ban certain types of laws. For example, the Constitution allows Congress to pass laws about how business is conducted across state lines. The Constitution forbids Congress from passing laws that limit people's freedom of religion. The bottom line is that no law can be made in the U.S. unless the Constitution allows it to be made. Each state also has its own constitution that works the same way as the U.S. Constitution, but only applies to that state. Many laws in your state come from your state's constitution and do not apply outside your state. Even so, laws in state constitutions must not violate the U.S. Constitution. Got that? So state laws have to be in line with the U.S. Constitution. Statutes. The Constitution gives Congress permission to pass laws about a limited number of topics. When Congress passes a law, that law is called a statute. Statutes passed by Congress apply to the entire United States. All of the thousands of statutes passed by Congress are collected together and organized by subject. The collection is called the United States Code. For example, the Constitution says Congress has the power to establish post offices and pass laws necessary and proper for carrying out that power. This means that Congress can establish post offices and pass all the laws needed for running a postal service. In the part of the U.S. Code that deals with post offices, you would find a statute that establishes the United States Postal Service. You would also find many other statutes having to do with running the U.S. Postal Service. There are statutes about what can and can't be sent through the mail, how the Postal Service must manage its money, working for the Postal Service, and many more. State constitutions also authorize state legislators to pass state laws. The state laws are also called statutes, and they only apply inside the state. Often, state statutes allow local governments to pass their own laws. Local laws are usually called ordinances, and they only apply within local boundaries, such as within a city or a county. Regulations. Okay. Oh, sorry. Here's a little example of a local ordinance. Leash required per city code. Oh, cute puppy. All right, sidetracked. Anyway, regulations. Congress has the power to pass laws, but not to carry them out. The executive branch has the power to execute or carry out laws, but not to pass them. This means the two branches must work together. The executive branch is full of agencies that carry out the laws. There are departments of agriculture, transportation, treasury, veteran affairs, and many more, including the Postal Service. Congress does not have time to pass laws about every little detail of how all those agencies should run. Instead, Congress gives each agency the power to create its own rules. The rules that an agency within the executive branch makes are called regulations. So, thinking back up to what we started with those pictures at the top now, a regulation has power similar to a law. Some regulations say what people can and can't do. For example, there are Postal Service regulations that prohibit spitting, blocking the door, or asking for money at a post office. Other regulations describe how things work. For example, the post office has a regulation allowing customers to pay for postage over the internet. States also have agencies, and state agencies also issue regulations. So this could be at the federal level or the state level. Judicial precedent and interpretation. Statutes and regulations aren't always clear. Very often, people will argue about the meaning of a law and how a particular law should work. When people argue about how a statute or regulation should work, it often leads to a lawsuit. In the lawsuit, one side complains that it has suffered because the other side has not followed the law properly. The lawsuit will go through the court system. The court's job is to interpret the law and decide how it should be applied to a specific case. The lawsuit will begin in the trial court and might be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. Once the Supreme Court has decided how the law should be interpreted, that interpretation must be followed in the future. This is called a precedent. Notice how it is spelled. Right there. A precedent is a decision that people can point to and say, hey, here's how you handled this situation before. In this way, the court's interpretation acts on law. Only the court can change a precedent. It does this by interpreting the laws differently, which creates a new precedent. At the state level, a state's Court of Appeals and Supreme Court set precedents for how the state laws should be interpreted. Sources of law. You guys all still with me? You're awake? You need to stretch? Hope you're staying off your phones. Okay. Types of law. Laws can be divided. Let me start that again. Laws can be divided into two main categories, criminal and civil. The sources of law you just read about create both kinds of laws. However, courts treat criminal and civil cases differently. Criminal law. Criminal laws are laws that make certain actions about a crime. These laws come from all three levels of government, federal, state, and local, and can be found in statutes, regulations, and sometimes in state constitutions. There are two general levels of crimes. Felonies are serious crimes that normally have a punishment of more than a year in jail. Misdemeanors are less serious crimes where the penalty is usually less than a year in jail or even just a fine. A law that makes it a crime to do something usually says whether violating the law will be considered a felony or a misdemeanor. Felonies and misdemeanors are also divided into classes depending on how serious they are. In a criminal trial, the question is always, did this person commit a crime? The government is always on one side of the case charging someone with a crime. The person accused of the crime, called the defendant, is always on the other side. The defendant is either found innocent of the crime and is acquitted, or he or she is found guilty and is sentenced with a fine or jail time. Okay, so there's three categories of crimes. Here's our little picture here. There's crimes against people, crimes against property, and crimes against the government. Can you think of an example of each? Little thinking moment here. Okay. Civil law. Here's a basic rule of thumb. If it's not criminal, it's civil. Civil laws involve a wide range of subjects such as property, divorce, contracts, wills, personal injury, bankruptcy, employment, agriculture, and taxes. For this reason, there are many more civil laws than criminal laws. Civil laws usually help settle disagreements between people. People may disagree over things like rights to property, custody of children in divorce, or what a contract says. The two sides in a civil case each get to tell their side of the story. The judge or jury decides what the facts are and what the remedy or solution should be. Close. All right, taking sides over here. Let's just quick take a look at this. So defendant is someone who is charged with a crime or accused of the wrongdoing of or accused of other wrongdoing. Plaintiff, someone who files a lawsuit against someone else in a civil court. All right, I'm coming back to this paragraph right here. Sometimes, like criminal cases, civil cases involve someone who has injured someone. Many injuries, such as accidents, are not caused by a crime. The person who caused the accident and the person who was hurt must come to an agreement about how the injured person can be compensated for his or her loss. Very often, civil law does not involve a problem or disagreement at all. If someone wants to make a will or draw up a contract to sell something, there are civil laws that say how those things should be done. All right, any questions there? If you have questions, email Mrs. Smith or Ms. Pazalski or me. Sources of law continued. Special systems of law. there are two systems of law that work a little differently from our regular system of law. They're different because they deal with two unique populations, the military and people under the age of 18. The special circumstances of these two groups make it necessary to have systems of law that are designed to handle their unique issues. Military law. The U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. Congress did this by enacting the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is a set of criminal laws that apply to people in the military. The UCMJ also lists the procedures for conducting a military trial and explains what punishments are allowed. The military justice system is entirely separate from the civilian system. It is designed for the special needs of the military, so the UCMJ contains some laws that would not be needed for regular citizens. For example, it includes laws against leaving the military without permission, showing disrespect to a superior officer, and failing to obey an order. All members of the military are subject to the military justice system. Okay, over here, it says a military trial is called a court-martial. The manual for court-martials explains how military trials must operate and give details about the laws in the UCMJ. The manual is actually an executive order signed by the president. That's the person, not the precedent that we talked about before. Notice that. Okay. Juvenile law. Criminal laws apply to everyone, but when a person under age 18 commits a crime, most states have a system of juvenile justice that deals with the case. The juvenile justice system is usually more flexible than the adult justice system. It allows a judge to look at many factors in a child's life when deciding what the consequences for committing a crime should be. The juvenile system is different because, as a society, we believe that young people sometimes just make bad choices that they would not make if they were more mature. The juvenile system offers more chances for young people to learn from mistakes without being negatively affected for the rest of their lives. Outside the juvenile justice system, there are Outside the juvenile justice system, there are other kinds of laws, more than two, that affect people under 18. Some of these are laws targeted at young people, like curfew laws or laws about school attendance. Other laws have been passed in order to protect children from abuse. Most states have a whole set of laws that describe what happens when an abused child is removed from his or her home. There are also laws about adoption, foster care, and special health and education programs for children. So over here in this box, we can see delinquent, a juvenile found guilty of a crime. Status offender is a juvenile that is found guilty of breaking a law that wouldn't be a crime if they were an adult, like skipping school. So they're breaking a law based on their status, which is that of a juvenile. Child Protective Services is the government agency in most states that respond to reports of child abuse or neglect. All right, the following is a PDF that you can't fill in. And so what you're going to do is answer the questions on the Google form that is provided to you. Okay? All right, I hope that helped. Sorry for the little fumbles there. I'm really tired. I'm sure you are too, but I'm always happy to talk to you. All right, good luck. Bye.